What does it take to destroy a country's economy? In Canada, the answer is becoming painfully clear. 23% of Canadians are no longer able to buy sufficient food. The price of groceries is consistently higher than it is in neighbouring USA, and the cost of gas, that's well over the roof. This is the story of a country that was once celebrated as one of the best places to live. However, that same country is now crushed under soaring prices, shrinking wages, and a series of broken promises. How did Canada, of all places, reach this breaking point? In this video, we delve into the choices, crisis, tactics, and policies that illustrate just how quickly a nation's economy can be destroyed. Stick around.
Trade tensions stalled momentum in Canada's economic growth this spring and put a chill on business investment, hiring, and consumer confidence.
Walk into any Canadian grocery store in 2025 and you can feel the shock in real time. A basket of staples such as bread, milk, eggs and meat can cost $50 or more, depending on where you shop. According to a BBC investigation, Canadian grocery bills are approximately 11.4% higher than those in the UK and the United States. When most Canadians compare their paychecks to their bills, the math just doesn't add up. In cities like Vancouver, for example, a dinner for two starts from $98. In the United States, the cost is approximately $75. Most Canadian cities are gradually getting more expensive than some of the most expensive cities in America, including Los Angeles. At the centre of the crisis is the inflation monster. Like many countries around the world, Canada experienced a sharp rise in consumer prices during the pandemic. However, unlike some of its peers, Canada's inflation and cost increases appear to be lingering far longer than expected. For many Canadians, this means a life that's not only more expensive, but increasingly unsustainable. Imagine paying California prices on Mississippi wages. That's exactly the situation many Canadians are facing right now. The median Canadian after-tax income has been approximately $74,200 since 2023. This is even lower than the average earnings in the poorest state in the US. In terms of household debt, Canadians now owe approximately $1.85 in debt for every $1 of their disposable income, ranking them among the most indebted households in the West. The result? Nearly 1 in 5 Canadians is unsure about something as essential as food. That's indeed a staggering figure for a G7 country. So why is this happening? Well, the answer isn't far from issues such as structural inefficiencies and market control. For example, Canada's grocery market is dominated by a handful of players, including Loblaw Companies Limited, which has been at the centre of numerous controversies surrounding alleged price fixing. When competition isn't strong enough and supply chains are fragile, prices remain high even after other conditions stabilise. When you add taxes and regulatory costs to the mix, it's easy to see why even middle-class Canadians are feeling squeezed too. In many Canadian provinces, it's not just about what you earn, but how much is left after taxes, fuel and groceries. And when these prices rise faster than wages, people start cutting corners or racking up credit card debt just to cover the basics. What is even more worrisome is that this isn't just temporary. Analysts at Desjardins Economics warned in early 2025 that the Bank of Canada's troubles are only just getting started, meaning Canadians are about to start viewing higher prices as the new normal. But if food and fuel are beginning to feel out of reach, what about something bigger? Something that defines long-term security and generational wealth? What about the dream of owning a home? If you thought groceries were bad, wait till you look at the housing market. Canada's housing crisis is now getting so severe that international analysts often cite Toronto and Vancouver as among the most unaffordable cities in the world, rivaling even Hong Kong, which is known for its sky-high property costs. Take Toronto as an example. The benchmark for a duplex now costs about $995,100 in the Greater Toronto area, while a modest starter home in Vancouver can run well over 1.2 million Canadian dollars. These buildings aren't even luxury estates or historic properties, they're just ordinary homes in neighbourhoods that, a generation ago, would have been considered middle-class suburbs. However, this wasn't always the case. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, just as home ownership was considered part of the American dream, it was also part of the Canadian dream. Families with very modest incomes could purchase their first home in their 20s or 30s, build equity, and eventually move up to a larger one. But that is changing dramatically. The price of housing has been outpacing wage growth for decades, and instead of correcting itself like the US market did after the 2008 crash, Canadian housing values continue to climb. When the value of houses in the US dipped during the Great Recession, Canada's housing market followed only slightly before bouncing back and has never really slowed down. So what went wrong? For one, zoning laws and restricted development rules across Canadian cities make it difficult to build enough new homes in order to meet the demand. When you add the issue of speculative buying and foreign investment, where wealthy investors purchase properties solely as financial assets, then you have a perfect storm. Homes stop being homes and start being profit centres, and such a move pushes more average families out of the market. This shift has no doubt caused deep generational divides among many Canadians. Baby boomers who purchased their homes when prices were far lower have seen their property values soar, becoming millionaires on paper. Millennials and Gen Z, however, face an entirely different reality. In fact, more young individuals in Canada are renting today than ever before, while many are forced into tiny condos or long commutes just to find something remotely affordable. In the social space, couples are delaying having children because they can no longer afford enough space for a growing family. Young professionals are moving out of urban areas and chasing cheaper housing in distant suburbs or even different provinces. And for some, the solution is to leave Canada altogether, to join the brain drain of skilled workers heading south to the United States or across the Atlantic. For decades, home ownership was seen as a rite of passage and a sign of stability and success, but it is now considered a luxury, and not in the metaphorical sense. According to a 2024 Angus Reid survey, 7 in 10 renters say they can't afford to buy a home yet or have given up on owning one. Such pessimism doesn't just hurt morale, it affects the entire economy. Without having confidence in their financial future, people spend less, invest less, and take fewer risks, all of which slowed down economic growth. The irony of all these? Canada has one of the largest landmasses on Earth, so in theory, space shouldn't be a problem. But because many people live in a handful of dense urban zones such as Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, the supply crunch feels very much permanent, and without any significant shift in policy, the dream of affordable housing would continue to remain out of reach for decades to come. So, what does this mean for a generation trying to build a life? If a country can't even house its people affordably, what does that say about its future? If homes are out of reach and essentials are unaffordable, then what's driving these costs up even further? Well, the answer often comes down to one word: monopoly. When people think of Canada, they often imagine an open and free market economy, where competition ensures fair pricing and innovation. But when you dig deeper, you will find an unsettling reality. Many of the country's essential industries are controlled by just a handful of powerful corporations. A lack of competition doesn't just reduce consumer choice, it actively drives prices higher and keeps them there. In 2017, a shocking investigation revealed that some supermarket chains, including Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro, among others, were involved in a bread price fixing scheme that had lasted over 14 years. This meant that bread was artificially overpriced across all major bakeries, and Canadian households collectively paid hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase it. Even when the scandal broke and Loblaw publicly admitted to its involvement, the solution offered was a $500 million settlement as compensation. As if that weren't enough, while investigations were still ongoing, Canadians continued to pay higher prices. Not only for bread, but for many other grocery items as well. The dominance of a few players means there is little incentive to lower prices or improve quality. Loblaw, along with Sobeys and Metro, controls more than 60% of Canada's grocery market. Having such control creates an environment that fosters collusion and weakens the natural competition that should keep prices fair. Even when new grocery chains try to enter the market, they are often squeezed out by the sheer market power of these giant corporations. But it's not just in groceries. Canada's telecommunications industry is another notorious example of limited competition. The Big Three, comprising of Rogers, Bell and TELUS, control nearly 90% of Canada's wireless market. For consumers, this means some of the highest cell phone and internet bills in the developed world. A 2018 CBS report revealed that Canadians pay some of the highest wireless prices in the world for mobile phone services, and many attempts by smaller providers to enter the market often end with them being acquired or crushed by anti-competitive practices. Banking is no better, as Canada's banking industry is dominated by its Big Five: Royal Bank of Canada, Toronto Dominion Bank, Bank of Montreal, Scotia Bank, and CIBC. These banks control nearly all retail banking services, mortgage lending, and financial investments. While Canadians are often told their banks are safe and stable, that stability comes at a cost, such as high monthly account fees, transaction charges, and credit interest rates. This is simply because competition is essentially non-existent. Then there's the airline industry. In theory, Canada's vast geography should encourage a competitive airline market, but in reality, just two carriers, Air Canada and WestJet, dominate the Canadian skies. Air Canada alone holds nearly 46% of the domestic market share, while WestJet holds an estimated 34%. This translates into company-set fares for travellers, especially in smaller cities where there's often only one airline option. In 2023, a study found that flights per kilometre within Canada cost, on average, 30% more than the same flight within the US or Europe. While travellers in other countries benefit from low-cost carriers driving competition, Canadians are being stuck with an oligopoly that dictates its ticket cost. A key factor that seems to be enabling these monopolies is government overregulation, combined with selective underregulation. Foreign companies continue to face significant hurdles when trying to compete in Canada. These protectionist policies are somewhat intended to preserve Indigenous ownership and control, but they also limit innovation and reduce consumer choice. At the same time, regulators often permit domestic mergers that further reduce competition, such as the controversial Rogers-Shaw merger, which was approved in 2023 despite public backlash and warnings about reduced competition. This results in an economy where essential services are costlier than they should be, and companies have little incentive to improve because they know consumers have nowhere else to turn. But it's not just about high prices. When just a few players dominate industries and opportunities are limited, talented individuals begin to look elsewhere. And that brings us to another critical piece of the puzzle, Canada's brain drain. One of the most troubling signs of a weakening economy is when its most talented people start leaving, and Canada is experiencing exactly that. Over the past decade, a growing number of skilled professionals, entrepreneurs, academics, and even athletes have been heading south to the United States or seeking opportunities across the Atlantic. Why? Because they can earn more and build better lives elsewhere. While the median US salary in 2025, according to Motio Research, is about $83,150, the average median salary in Canada, adjusted for currency, is about $67,282. However, that gap is not new, but it has become increasingly problematic as the cost of living in Canada continues to increase. For young professionals, this makes staying in Canada a tough sell. The pull of American educational institutions is another factor. Thousands of Canada's brightest high school students apply to Ivy League universities such as Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, or top-tier research institutions like MIT and Stanford each year. Many of them never return, and this is because the American job market, especially in technology hubs like Silicon Valley, offers salaries and resources that Canadian employers simply can't match. A software engineer in Toronto might earn 80,000 Canadian dollars a year, while the same role in California could pay well over 150,000 US dollars, not including stock options and other benefits. This brain drain is also visible in sports. Canada's national pastime hockey has become an unexpected case study of this talent exodus. Despite being home to some of the best players in the world, Canada hasn't celebrated a Stanley Cup win by any Canadian team since 1993. That's over 3 decades without a championship in a sport that Canada essentially invented. The reason? Many of the company's top players signed contracts with US-based teams instead. In the startup space, a good number of ambitious Canadians launching startups often relocate to the United States to access better funding and larger markets. According to a 2024 report by the Business Development Bank of Canada, nearly 1 in 4 Canadian startups with high growth potential moves their operations outside the country within 5 years of founding. These are companies that could have created jobs and wealth at home, but are instead boosting the economies of other nations. Again, what's causing this? Beyond wages and opportunities, there's also frustration with the bureaucracy and risk aversion that is present within Canada's economic structure. Industries dominated by monopolies or oligopolies leave little room for new players to thrive. For a skilled worker or entrepreneur, this often means hitting a glass ceiling at home, with fewer opportunities to break through. So where does this leave Canada? With rising costs, stagnant wages, and industries that discourage competition, it's no wonder so many people are asking whether the Canadian dream still exists. If the best and brightest keep leaving, who's left to fix problems at home? Speaking about problems, there is indeed a growing problem in the heart of the country. There was a time when Canada was known as one of the safest places on earth. Parents let their kids ride their bikes across town without worry, small businesses rarely had to think about theft, and violent crime was something people mostly associated with television dramas. In recent times, that image has undergone rapid changes. The crime rate, which had been declining steadily since the 1990s, has now reversed its course, leaving many Canadians wondering what is going wrong. An increase in stabbings and assault has become a regular fixture in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Car thefts have soared to the point where Toronto police reported over 12,000 vehicles stolen in 2023 alone. a record-breaking figure that overwhelmed insurance companies and frustrated law enforcement at the time. But perhaps even more concerning than the crime themselves is the pattern of repeat offenders. In Vancouver, for instance, the same 40 individuals were linked to more than 6,000 police encounters, averaging 150 arrests each per year. These are not just petty crimes either, as many of them get involved in violence, weapons, and substances. Yet these same offenders are routinely arrested, charged, and then released back onto the streets, often within hours in some cases. Imagine being assaulted on a Monday, only to see your attacker released on Tuesday, ready to do something unpredictable again. Sadly, that's the reality many Canadians have to deal with. The economic cost of an increased crime rate is equally enormous. More crimes means higher healthcare costs to treat victims of assault, more pressure on police services, and greater demand for social support systems. Businesses in high crime neighbourhoods pay more for security, and some even close down entirely, which leads to job losses and reduced local investment. The Conference Board of Canada estimates that crime costs the country billions each year in lost productivity and public spending. This is money that could have been invested in schools, infrastructure, or healthcare, rather than dealing with repeat offenders. This shift is reshaping how Canadians view their country. Safety, once taken for granted, is now a luxury that depends on where you live and the level of security you can afford. While crime is not unique to Canada alone, the pace of its rise, alongside the unwillingness to address repeat offending, is taking away one of the nation's key social pillars. Yet crime is only one layer of Canada's deepening crisis. Beneath it lies yet again something more surprising. For many years, immigration has been one of Canada's proudest achievements, and its symbol of openness and diversity. The points-based system introduced in 1976 was hailed as one of the fairest in the world. The choice of immigrants based on education, skill, and language proficiency, this strategy brought in skilled workers who significantly helped in the growth of the country. Nevertheless, the immigration policies have gone through significant changes in recent years, with impacts that have left most Canadians questioning if the system is performing as intended. One example is the evolution of the Temporary Foreign Worker Programme. Initially designed to fill short-term labour shortages in specialised fields, it has become a pathway for corporate organisations to bring in large numbers of low-wage workers. Employers benefit from a steady supply of labour willing to accept lower wages and weaker working conditions, but local workers lose bargaining power and wages across entire sectors stagnate. Instead of encouraging long-term settlement and integration, these temporary programs often treat people as disposable labour, cycling them in and out of the country as economic conditions change. This has spilled over into housing and infrastructure. Canada's population grew by over 1 million back in 2023, making it one of the fastest rates since 1957. Immigration is an economic driver for sure, but such speed and scale of the growth have collided with the housing market in crisis. Cities like Toronto and Vancouver, already notorious for unaffordable housing, have seen rental prices surge by double digits annually. Public sectors such as transit, schools, and healthcare have also struggled to keep up, leaving both newcomers and long-term residents frustrated. At the same time, Canada is facing controversial policy decisions such as the expansion of medical assistance in dying. Introduced in 2016 to help individuals with terminal illnesses and unbearable suffering, MAID has since expanded to include individuals whose death is not reasonably foreseeable and, starting in 2027, those with certain mental illnesses. On paper, MAID has been about free will and compassion, but in practice, it has raised disturbing ethical questions. Numerous stories have emerged of individuals choosing assisted death, not because of incurable illness, but because of poverty or homelessness. In one widely publicised case, a man in Ontario applied for MAID after facing eviction and said bluntly, "I don't want to die, but I don't want to be homeless more than I don't want to die." These incidents have resulted in outrage, with critics arguing that the Canadian government is offering death faster than it offers help. Even the United Nations Right Council has expressed concern, warning that Canada's MAID expansion could violate the rights of vulnerable populations. Yet applications continue to rise, with MAID accounting for 4.1% of all deaths in Canada in 2022. Indeed, the programme is growing faster than most public healthcare services, and is creating a troubling perception. In a country where it takes several weeks to get a specialist appointment or find affordable housing, it's easier and faster to apply for assisted death than to receive basic support to live. Instead of building a future where people want to stay and thrive, Canada appears to be normalising despair and institutionalising it. What does it say about all that is wrong with Canada's economy? For many Canadians, these aren't just policy debates, they're the reality of their daily life. When a country like Canada reaches a point where the solution it offers involve leaving either across the border or through a lethal injection, has it already started to lose hope in itself? Canada's struggles didn't appear overnight, and they won't disappear overnight either. However, when a country reaches a point where basic living feels like a struggle for survival, something has to change. Will change come from within, or will it be forced by circumstance? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please ensure to hit the like button, drop a comment and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.